"Why, what's the matter, Miss Lily? You're not well," he exclaimed, and she forced her lips into a pallid smile of reassurance. "I'm a little tired. It's nothing. Stay with me a moment, please." She faltered that she should be asking this service of Rosedale. He glanced at the dirty and unpropitious corner on which they stood, and with the shriek of the elevated and the tumult of trams and wagons contending hideously in their ears. "We can't stay here, but let me take you somewhere for a cup of tea. The Longworth is only a few yards off, and there'll be no one there at this hour." A cup of tea in quiet, somewhere out of the noise and ugliness, seemed for the moment the one solace she could bear. A few steps brought them to the ladies' door of the hotel he had named, and a moment later he was seated opposite to her, and the waiter had placed the tea tray between them. To clear the air, Rosedale tried to take an easy tone. "Why, Miss Lily, I haven't seen you for an age. I didn't know what had become of you." As he spoke, he was checked by an embarrassing sense of complications to which this might lead. Lily, to whom the tea had restored her usual clearness of mind, saw what was in his thought and said with a slight smile, "You would not be likely to know about me. I have joined the working classes." He stared in genuine wonder. "You don't mean, why, what on earth are you doing?" "Learning to be a milliner, at least trying to learn," she hastily qualified the statement. Rosedale suppressed a little whistle of surprise. "Come off, you ain't serious, are you?" "Perfectly serious. I'm obliged to work for my living." "But I thought you were with Norma Hatch." "You had heard I had gone to her as her secretary?" "Something of the kind, I believe." He leaned forward to refill her cup. Raising her eyes to his, she said suddenly, "I left her 2 months ago." Rosedale continued to fumble awkwardly with the teapot, and she felt sure he had heard what had been said of her. But what was there that Rosedale did not hear? "Wasn't it a soft berth?" he inquired with an attempt at lightness. "Too soft. One might have sunk in too deep." Lily sat looking at him more intently than she had ever looked before. An uncontrollable impulse was urging her to put her case to this man, from whose curiosity she had always so fiercely defended herself. "You know Mrs. Hatch, I think. Well, perhaps you can understand that she might make things too easy for one." Rosedale looked faintly puzzled, and she remembered that elusiveness was lost on him. "It was no place for you, anyhow," he agreed, so suffused in the light of her full gaze that he found himself being drawn into strange depths of intimacy. He, who had had to subsist on mere fugitive glances, now found her eyes settling on him with a brooding intensity that fairly dazzled him. "I left," Lily continued, "lest people should say I was helping Mrs. Hatch to marry Freddie Van Augsburg, who is not in the least too good for her, and as they still continue to say it, I see that I might as well have stayed where I was." "Oh, Freddie." Rosedale brushed aside the topic with an air of its unimportance, which gave a sense of the immense perspective he had acquired. "Freddie don't count, but I knew you weren't mixed up in that. It ain't your style." Lily colored slightly. She could not conceal from herself that the words gave her pleasure. She would have liked to sit there, drinking tea and continuing to talk to Rosedale. But the old habit of observing the conventions reminded her that it was time to bring their colloquy to an end, and she made a motion to push back her chair. Rosedale stopped her with a protesting gesture. "Wait a minute, don't go yet. Sit quiet and rest a little longer. You look thoroughly played out. And you haven't told me—" He broke off, conscious of going farther than he meant. She saw the struggle and understood it. He began again abruptly. "What on earth did you mean by saying just now that you were learning to be a milliner?" "Just what I said. I am an apprentice at Regina's." "Good Lord, you? But what for? I knew your aunt had turned you down. Mrs. Fisher told me about it. But I understood you got a legacy from her." "I got $10,000, but the legacy is not to be paid till next summer." "Well, but look here, you could borrow on it any time you wanted. She shook her head gravely. No, for I owe it already. Owe it? The whole 10,000? Every penny. She paused, then continued abruptly. I think Gus Trenor spoke to you once about having made some money for me in stocks? Rosedale, congested with embarrassment, muttered that he remembered something of the kind. He made about $9,000, Lily pursued. At the time, I understood that he was speculating with my own money. It was incredibly stupid of me, but I knew nothing of business. Afterward, I found out that he had not used my money, that what he said he had made, he had really given me. It was meant in kindness, of course, but it was not the sort of obligation one could remain under. Unfortunately, I had spent the money before I discovered my mistake, and so my legacy will have to go to pay it back. That is the reason I am trying to learn a trade. She made this statement clearly, deliberately. She had a passionate desire that someone should know the truth about this transaction, and also that her intention to repay the money should reach Judy Trenor's ears. And it had occurred to her that Rosedale, who had surprised Trenor's confidence, was the person to receive her version of the facts. She had even felt a momentary exhilaration at relieving herself of the detested secret. But the sensation faded, and as she ended, her pallor was suffused with a deep blush of misery.